Hello, hello, everyone. It is Kenyon here as Basketball Rewind. Don't worry, I didn't have to change my clothes because we're just recording later for everyone. We are back again. We are done with the good, the bad, the ugly. Hopefully, you enjoyed that episode, went through all of that. And if not, go back, check it out. But today we are joined by Louis Zatzman. So, to give a little bit of information about Louis, for those of you who aren't aware, and most of you are, I will say this. Number one, freelance writer indeed is something that you can add to his name. He has either writes for or has written for a lot of publications, including the former 538, at one point, CBC, Sportsnet, you name it. One of the first articles that I remember him writing was actually by Vice. So obviously Pascal's still on this team. I'm going to ask him a little bit about Pascal, but it was in 2018. Sorry, Pascal Siakam has the skills to become the NBA's next two-way star. So very interesting to have that come through right before the championship. Really good time to write also or do content
Yeah.
for Raptors stuff. So yeah, without a further ado, we'll do that. Is there anything else that I missed before we get into the conversation today?
No, no, you're right though. I always maintained that if Kawhi Leonard had stayed, I would not have freelanced nearly as much. I would certainly have a full-time job just because,
Yeah.
his presence in Toronto brought so many eyeballs, so much, so many clicks and so much money. So, I was upset by him leaving for a couple of reasons, but no, had a chance to freelance for, anywhere and everywhere under the sun since then as a result. So I enjoyed that too.
That's actually before we really dive into the conversation, that brings up something that's interesting. People don't always talk about the influence that having a star and not fully going what like in that direction, the tank direction, what that does to a marketplace. It's one
Yeah.
of the things that you talk to Hawks fans and they just talk about the importance of Trey. No matter what, they're like, he is a force in our market. And of course, one thing I do have to say is that I'm not from Toronto, by the way. I'm from Winnipeg originally. I do think that Torontonians need to appreciate their city a little bit more, but just putting that out there. Hey, at least we have one, yeah. Beyond, but in general, I do think that it's an underrated thing that like having a star player or multiple star players is it changes things, even if you're not part of the quote unquote the national media. So with that being said, most of our stuff is going to revolve around how do we maximize Scotty Barnes and Pascal Siakam, um, if you think that they can work or not, and basically running under that premise as the main conversation piece. Because at the end of the day, we don't do a lot of moves. I didn't put my phone down. I don't know if you put your phone down, Lewis, or the other two, which is Beyond and Coach, who are joining us for this wonderful conversation. I didn't put my phone down this summer, and we didn't do much. We almost did, but we didn't. So,
Yep.
uh, with that being said, I'm just gonna jump in. I've written down a couple of questions, but I think the first thing that is very, very interesting is we come back from a Detroit win where we just put a shellacking on them, and obviously OG is back. We get closer to a full strength team. My question is since Dallas, it seems like we've had an uptick in our offensive rating. And I'm wondering what that kind of looks like because I do think that it is somewhat correlated, potentially, just going to put this out there, to us changing the way that we play, which we will get into later. But it does seem like we changed slightly the frequency of which we go into the post.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's been pretty um, tangible changes made in Toronto's offense from day one to where we're at now. And largely because Pascal Siakam has said, publicly and I'm sure privately, look, I'm good in the post. Please let me have post up touches. And he's been phenomenal in the post. I thought Darko has done a pretty good job of melding sort of his philosophical desires with Pascal's. There was a play today where, I thought it was pretty indicative of how the two can meld. So they had Horn set, which is a guy on each elbow, um, Pascal on one, Yak on the other. Ball went to Yak on the left elbow, and there was a back screen. So they run like a little back screen into like a pin in, and the back screen for Pascal, and he used the screen to cut to the rim, and then that pin in for Schroeder to come up, and he goes into a dribble handoff. The Raptors run it all the time. But Pascal used that first screen. He buried his guy under the rim, and Jakob just sort of said, screw it to the rest of the play, just threw the ball right into Siakam under the rim. And he missed his little layup. He missed 2 or 3 layups to start the game, and then he made everything, and Toronto blew the Pistons out of the water. But I thought that was a great way of melding sort of what Rakovic wants the offense to be with how Siakam can succeed. Like all the cutting, the hub stuff, the movement, the passing can work really well with post-ups. It takes thought. And I think the Raptors are putting the thought in.
Now, I know Beyond wants to jump in on that, but I will first say, to steal a little bit of his point that he's probably going to say, is that why do we make things so complicated? But I'll let Beyond go.
Well, it's funny that Louis mentioned that, because literally when we had our discussion about this game this week, I alluded to that there as well too, because like, oh, we're actually having kind of like a hybrid of what each party wants in this case. And it's like, it reminded me of the old Fab Five, U of M office, where it's like, Howard and Weber doing, high lows in this case with big man to big man. It's like, oh, hello, we're doing some of that now. There's so many ways they can do some of that stuff if they want to play Pearl in that position. I can think of at least 3 off the top of my head that I'm not sure why we haven't exploited that. And to Kenyon's point, I don't know why we make it so difficult ourselves. It's like that. I think that's gonna be a running theme throughout this discussion. But I'm glad to see that there seems to be some meeting of the mind now, at least, where we might have some type of idea. And for the first time, I think I would say, starting from the Boston game, I feel like there's actually some type of there's some understanding or some type of idea of purpose of what they want to do. The first 2-3 weeks of the season, it was a bit of a mismatch of everything. There's no idea from possession to possession. What are we trying to do on this possession? What are we trying to attack? It was just like, we're just kind of running like X and O's, like, okay, I'm supposed to be here and you're supposed to be there. And then we run here, and it was everyone just following their instructions of where they think they're supposed to be. The last couple of games, it seems like now we're playing with more of a purpose of like, okay, we know where we want to attack. And that's, to Lewis's point, that was why I noticed as well too, especially with the first quarter of that, is like, oh, we finally have some type of idea what we're doing, and we're melding each side's philosophy. So that's great.
Coach, before you go, so again, do you happen to have the offensive numbers from Dallas onwards? I'm just curious what it was, or the before or the after. Sorry, Louis.
Sorry. Oh, do I have the offensive numbers?
Yeah, I'm just curious if you happen to have it.
I don't. I can pull them up in 30 seconds though.
Okay, Coach, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean the high-low offense, in the simplistic sense, is a good thing when you have the right personnel to do so. Problem at times when I've seen them try to do that, it's sometimes it certainly works, but Pirtle doesn't really attract much gravity. So you could sag off Pirtle, and then that high-low is just not going to work because he can't shoot. So it's kind of picking those spots on when the defense is up on Pirtle, and then you can make that entry pass or that low post pass into Pascal. And that's where he succeeds, of course.
Yeah. And Pirtle's done what he can. There's been 3 or 4 times I've noticed where, he's just taken that as a runway and sort of driven into the paint. And I think he's made a couple layups. I've seen him miss a floater or 2. He's trying, but you're absolutely right. It's hard when that elbow entry guy isn't drawing the defense up to the elbow. That just really cramps everything. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think too, is it's funny because the person on the roster that could play that role as Pirtle in this case is if you put Barnes in that spot, who is showing that right now so far this season, that's kind of his sweet spot, that area at the moment. So it's interesting. They haven't really done a lot of that with Barnes and Siakam. in any scenarios in this case. Now, question is where you put Pirtle. Is he's in the dunker spot? Where you position him? But at least I think if Pirtle's on the floor, I think they should try to do more of that with the two of them once Pirtle's off the floor, because to me, that seems to be ideal to execute that type of play. But we'll see moving forward how that plays out, because the Pirtle quandary is going to continue throughout the season until further notice.
Yeah. And that's to those number points, Scotty Barnes shooting 59% from long mid-range on the season. That's like Kevin Durant numbers. If you sync off him, he will just hit the jumper this year. Toronto's offense, basically middle of the league since the Dallas game, which is a huge improvement.
Wow.
A massive improvement. So
Wow.
Look, this brings up an interesting point, and I want to ask you, Lewis. I don't want to take your fire from you, Kenyon, but like I'm just wondering, going back to those mid-range stats, and we know Siakam's a great mid-range shooter too. Why don't we run like just some type of high screen roll at Pirtle further up in this case, almost like the half court, and just having them just going downhill? Like I don't understand why that's not in. I go back to the year after the championship where Siakam kind of blew up in this case here. They used to run that all the time with Gasol or, sometimes with Ibaka, mostly with Gasol.
who used to be the ball handler for that? Lowry.
Yeah, but even Siakam had some moments like that where he was starting to do that before the bubble and everything like that. They were starting to do. I remember a game against Sacramento right before the bubble, and I think that was Utah and Sacramento. Where he made some of his best games right before the bubble, and they were doing the same thing. The moment he got the half court, Gasol, boom, pick his man, and he's running downhill. And I don't.
Well, he shot almost 38% on pull-up threes that year. Right. And he's never come close to that number since. And if, he's shooting, below 30% from deep this year. He's hit one of his last 18, I think. And if they were to run that high pick and roll Milwaukee does that a lot for Damian Lillard, for example, at half court. And if you don't have your defenders at half court, he'll just shoot from there. And if the Raptors just shot from there, the defense would say, thank you, Lord, right? And so if you do run that high, like two-sided pick and roll, would the defense even come up beyond the arc, or would they just sit there and say, what are you doing?
Well, I think I'm thinking of it from the standpoint of if they came up, then he's quick enough to get past whomever it is that's the big that was there. So now you got the big one. The other possibility is if the big is like, say, someone like Brook Lopez is going to sit in there and camp out in the lane, he's got a 17-foot jump shot, which is right up his alley.
I see. Sorry, I was picturing like way out beyond the 3-point arc.
Way up three-point line. Okay, so even if that scenario plays out and say Lopez is now above the 3-point line, say we're using Milwaukee, for example, now you got one-on-one where he's now playing Lopez out in space. I'll take that scenario than what they do most of the time where it's like you're playing the Lopez's hands trying to shoot a 5-foot jump shot or a 5-foot hook shot over Lopez. Like, to me, that just seems like it just plays more to his advantages where he could use all his moves and get him off balance to draw fouls, set up other guys now because they're all just scrambling perhaps because they don't like the matchup out in space. All these things can happen. And I just don't understand why they don't seem to do that more often with either one. To be honest with you, I would say even Barnes. I think he's at the point maybe you could get away with that. He's not the best dribbler, but in those circumstances, Big's likely going to pick the ball off of Barnes in that space. Like, so I just find it fascinating that we don't seem to at least exhaust that idea of what that might look like.
Well, that points to the entire, philosophical tension of the offense this year, because Nick Nurse's offense last year said, look, our greatest strength is Siakam cooking in isolation. So we're going to run everything to get him isolated against either bigs or smalls and let him cook. And there were very few assists. There was very little baller man movement. Siakam was close to the leader of the league in isolations, and he was very successful, right? He carried Toronto to an average offense, I think 12th in offense, given offensive rebounds, which was by all accounts like quite good, I think, from what they could have expected. And Rajakovic has said, that's not how we want to play. We are going to go away from those strengths, and the offense is a lot worse. And so I think there's a real tension in instituting modern principles that work for other teams that end up in higher quality shots versus traditional sort of pound the rock principles, which is where a lot of Toronto's guys have made their bread, so to speak, which works better for them. And so I think there is like a philosophy wrestling going on between what the rest of the league is and what Rajakovic wants, but what the roster is actually built to succeed doing.
To that point, I didn't think tonight's discussion would get to this point, but I'm going to put it on the table. I have a theory. You mentioned it's Darko's philosophy. I have a theory. I don't think it's Darko's philosophy. He knows where I'm going with this already.
I know where you're going to with this.
I think this is Masai's philosophy. And the reason why I say so, when Pirtle came last in the trade, and you were covering the team, obviously, you remember in this case here, there was about a 2-week period where they were running essentially this offense. And there's backdoor cuts for a couple of games. Like, oh, we're all saying, look, backdoor cuts for Boucher and Pascal and this and that. And then the league got wise and did what we expected them to do. I remember in this case here, article came out maybe 2 weeks in after the Utah game where Pascal said he's just trying to find the joy, I think, paraphrasing. And as he's sitting out the corner, I refer to him as Pascal Klay Thompson, sitting out in the corner, waiting to shoot threes in this case here. It was that same offense at the time. Now, my theory is Nick Nurse tried the modern day offense you referred to and realized, like, this is not going to work if I'm planning to actually make my bread in this case here. I'm going back to what I did before. And enough of this. We tried this for 2 weeks and it's going nowhere. We can run pick and rolls for Fred as much as we want. This is going nowhere. So I think Masai wants to run this offense, and essentially we're doing the same thing now. Insert Schroeder for Fred, and we're kind of doing the same offense. At least trying to implement the same offense with the same results, essentially.
Well, so this is the piece I'm writing for Tuesday morning right now.
I need to steal your thunder then.
Which is Jakob Poeltl is really good at a lot of things, but he is not being proven to help Pascal Siakam in the way that he plays the game. Siakam's pick and roll numbers plummet with Poeltl on the court. They did last year. They are this year. Schroeder's numbers, Van Fleet's numbers skyrocket with Poeltl on the court. And so, there's a lot of complementary pieces on the roster, but there's also a lot of pieces that don't seem to fit together.
So go ahead, Coach. I just say that Kenyon has a pick and roll question that I asked him to ask you, so that kind of leads to that one.
Yeah, it was one of the questions that I was literally like, how many pick and rolls have we had, and who is like the most? Because you basically covered what I was, but yeah, Coach.
Yeah, I know what Lewis brought up an interesting point about this conflict right now of there's this Darko basketball, which is more egalitarian, let's just put it that way. And then there's the mismatch isolation offense. Now, from what I've seen this year, the mismatch isolation offense has worked quite well for Toronto for the most part. Today's game against Detroit was the first day I've seen Darko offense work quite well. The horns and UCLA high post stuff. Poeltl and Schroeder really operating fairly well. I get it, it's Detroit, but it's progress to a degree. I guess my question maybe is for you all, or Lewis, if you want to take this as well. It's like, they're in a bind, aren't they? A little bit.
Well, I'll pass that up to you guys.
Fair enough. I mean, it's you're gonna see this push and pull. We've talked about it offline for sure a number of times. Now, I'm not saying that Darko's a good or a bad coach. What I'm saying is that he's getting his sea legs under him, and we don't really have a lot of veteran coaching on this staff. We have good coaches, smart minds, but we don't have
graybeard, right?
Graybeards. So, and sometimes a graybeard, as I keep reminding people, Golden State has Kenny Atkinson as an assistant coach, right? And I believe when Steve Kerr was there, now I have to go back, but Mike Brown was also brought on at the same time. Mike Brown had, coached some pretty good players. I'm just going to put it at that. And for those of you who don't know, you might want to look that up. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it would have, that's the one thing that I would have liked, but I mean, we are where we are. We can't, none of us, as far as I know, have a DeLorean in our garage. So
Gary Stotts is available.
Yeah, this is true.
Sorry, Louis. I know it's touchy.
I mean, to be fair, the man does cover the. How is Terry Stotts doing right now since he's out of job?
It is. It is very uncommon for rookie head coaches to have former head coaches on the staff. There's reasons for that.
Yes.
And so, Steve Kerr absolutely came in with established head coaches on his bench. That's the exception, though. It's much more normal for someone like Darko Rajakovic, who's been a long-time assistant, to have a staff more like what he's built, where he has some guys he's worked with before. A couple holdovers, Jimmy Sand, big holdover for like development. But by and large, just like young, bright minds he's crossed paths with, he's worked with, some he hasn't. That's much more normal.
For sure. Now, the interesting thing, just to kind of jump ahead a little bit, the Scotty numbers are so interesting because there are people that say that Scotty is out there, and when he's out there, he needs to space the floor for Pascal Siakam because he's such a good shooter. Now, don't get me wrong. Scotty Barnes has been amazing at shooting the ball this year, although it's very interesting is that he's only made, I believe, 2 corner threes, and most of his shots are the harder above the break threes. Now, I did look at NBA.com. Again, this doesn't include today. We're going to get into those more specific numbers in a second, but what I find interesting is a few days ago, someone posted some of the 3-point attempts and free throw rate and all that kind of stuff, and rim frequency with Siakam playing with Barnes and without. And what I found very interesting was that he shoots less threes when Siakam's on the floor. He gets more paint touches. I don't have a problem with this, by the way. He gets to the rim more. His percentages obviously go up. So I have my own theories, but it seems like when Pascal's off, he typically, again, remember, he does more the other way. He's shooting the ball more from 3. He gets to the rim less. And you would think in the sense that when Pascal's taken off and say you put Otto Porter out there, that he wouldn't have to be the one spacing. I have my theories. I think Beyond knows my theories. Coach knows my theories. I'm wondering what your theory is as to why that might be. And then I might say my theory, depending on what you say.
So why is Scotty Barnes taking fewer threes and more at rim attempts when Siakam is in the game? Well, I think that is largely because of who they're playing alongside. It's not because of just the two of them. I think a lot of it has to do with who Scotty plays with when Siakam's not in the game. So if you look at their normal rotation pattern, Barnes is the first guy off, and it's because Rajakovic likes to bring him in at the end of the first to play alongside what was all bench units, but recently they added OG Anunoby, so it's the 2 starters plus the bench. They've been really good with OG. But in those groups, Barnes plays point guard. Malachi Flynn is the shooting guard, really. And so in those groups, Scotty Barnes is running a lot of pick and rolls. You asked, I believe, Beyond about the pick and roll numbers. Barnes has run more than Siakam this year, which is a big change from last year. Siakam ran a lot more last year. And Schroeder, of course, has run the most. And so Barnes spends a lot more time behind the arc because that's where he's initiating plays. And that group has generally 2 bigs, sometimes 3, Achua, Boucher. So a lot of guys who like to cut, get inside the arc. And so as a result, Barnes doesn't spend nearly as much time around the rim because when he has the ball in his hands behind the arc, he still isn't, the best in the league at sort of moving himself to the rim. He's better when guys create for him, when he's cutting. Whereas alongside Siakam, Schroeder's in the game. And so Barnes is the 2 or the 3 or the 4, whatever. They don't really do positions, I guess. But so someone else was running point guard. Barnes takes a lot of handoff, second side stuff. He's moving. And so in those cases, he gets to the rim a lot more often, spends a lot less time behind the arc. That's my guess. It's more about Schroeder. I think, though, this points to a broader thing, which I'm sure is what you want to discuss here, is I think Siakam and Barnes can work really well together, but I don't think with this group, right? This is not the team to make the 2 of them complement each other well.
Yeah, we that is a bolded thing that we I was going
You
to
hit
ask
the
if I
nail on
could.
the head.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I the way that I see it is part of it is Barnes right now has improved, but his
Mhm.
handle is one of the key things. I said it even sorry Samson to steal Samson's thunder before Samson. I've been saying that he needs the handle, and that the handle is even more important than the jump shot because
Yeah.
that's how he gets into space. And right now, um, I mean a perfect example is why he sometimes will call for certain switches like get Peyton Pritchard off of me and go for Jason Tatum because he feels more comfortable against someone his own size because they're probably not going to attack his dribble. It brings me back to last year in that Cleveland game where I'm yelling at the TV like, dude, you have Donovan Mitchell on you. He has 4 fouls. You are that size. He is that size. Just take it to him. And
Yeah.
I thought that it was him being passive, and I realized it's not necessarily that he's passive, but I think that he knows his limitations.
Hmm. Uh, Sorry, I just to jump in again.
Go for it.
Darko had one of my favorite quotes I've ever heard after the game today. And so it was I was about Scotty Barnes, just the very common question: what's he good at, basically? What do you envision his future being? And
So
Darko said, if you're
I'm
good
just
at,
laughing because we said it the exact quote in the go for it, but we said it.
yeah.
But
So
it's
I'll
it's
repeat it
funny.
quickly
It's
then.
funny.
Yeah,
I loved it so much.
it is a
If
good
you're good
one.
at one thing, you can be in the league. If you're good at two, you can positively impact. If you're good at three, you're an all-star. If you're good at four, you're out of the league because you're deluding yourself. Uh, Unbelievable. And I think then the follow-up was, okay, then what are Scotty's 2 or 3 strengths? And Darko paused and said, we're still figuring that out right now. And so one, that's scary. Like, he is an all-star this year, and they don't know what his 2 or 3 good things are yet. That's crazy. But two, it really does point to the malleability of what this team is trying to do, what they're trying to figure out.
Absolutely. And right before Beyond goes, I'll just say my concern. We don't have to jump into this topic, but my concern has always been you have to limit the amount of projects that you have on a team. Barnes is a major project. I have no problems with that. Precious is another major project, and it's just like you can't have too many guys where you're like, well, maybe he's a 5, maybe he's a 4, maybe he's a 3. If
Yeah.
you have too many of that on one single team, as I say, I just put it in simplest terms. There's only a certain amount of minutes on the floor at any one time, and there's only one ball. So if everyone's trying to learn the same skill, you might be in some trouble. Uh, Beyond, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, I just want to say, I guess you could look at flip side of the coin about what his strengths are and his weaknesses, or whatever you want to phrase it. In this case, in one way, it's scary because he's actually performing quite well. The other way you could flip the other way is like, isn't that a little concerning? We're year 3, we still quite don't know quite what he is. Isn't that other way you flip it? Like that's my concern. Like, I mean, as well as he's playing now, I tell us the Kenya, I tell us the coach is like, just to use his own draft group. There's guys I know what they are. Even if you want to
Mhm.
say what they are, like I know what Jalen Green's about. I don't have to worry about what Jalen Green's about. I kind of know what Cade's about, even in limited action. I know what he's about. Mobley, move on, so on. For Scotty to still be a bit of an enigma in year 3, it could be looked as a positive thing. Hey, sky's the limit. But at the same time, though, it could be like at some point to go back to essentially Darko's quote. At some point, we got to narrow down like where are you exactly, right? And that to me is the fascinating part. That this season, I hope, gives us an answer by the time we get to April. We know exactly what we're dealing with. Coach, you go ahead.
Yeah, one player and one team had this problem with, or not, I wouldn't call it a problem, but an enigma. It was with Giannis. By year 3, people were like, okay, great athlete. We see that. He's long, he's lanky, he can block shots, he can do a little bit of everything. He didn't have a jump shot at all at that time. And I think the Raptors had played them in the playoffs that first year with DeRozan and all those guys, and you could see there's something there, but you didn't know really what until the next year when Budenholzer came on, and then they brought in Brooke Lopez, Middleton started to develop, and they start to build the team around Giannis's strengths and weaknesses, more or less. I'm not saying so much the Raptors need to do that. Well, ideally, yeah, they probably should, but it's going to be interesting to see over the next couple of years how that turns out for Scotty and what they start to develop those one or two elite things because they're going to have to eventually, I would assume.
Well, picture an alternate reality where instead of 6 power forwards, the Raptors have 2, right? Let's say Precious
Like
Achiuwa, Chris Boucher, Pascal Siakam are on other teams, maybe even Jakob Poeltl, and in place of those guys, they have, say, Brook Lopez, right? Who has really, I think we're living in a Brook Lopez era right now, where all the centers drafted since Brook Lopez that are good can do what Brook Lopez, like Evan Mobley, Chet Holmgren, Victor Wembanyama, they're all Brook Lopez. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting way off on a tangent here. But imagine if Scotty Barnes was in that ecosystem. And my question is, do you think we still would consider him an enigma, or would we have a much better sense of his, 3 good things?
Much better sense, in my opinion, because you found out with Giannis what his 3 things were in that system that you just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
That's a tricky one.
I'm gonna zag on that one, and I'm gonna say not entirely.
Yes.
You would be fitting him into a box. However, does he want to be fit into that box?
Exactly.
And I think that that's really part of that question and part of the conversation that has to probably happen at some point is like, young man, what do you want to be? And then let's create a pathway for you to get there. Forget about the Instagram bio for a second.
The other thing is he's unique. Like
Yes.
there, ODB, there ain't no father to his style.
Oh,
Like
I'm not gonna explain that one to the viewers.
of all the bigs like him who are athletically dominant, none of them make those immediate decisions in space. Nobody. And you can see the Bucks asked Giannis to become that this year, and I think he will figure it out, but it's taking him a lot of time. On the short roll, when he's not seeing a wall, he's like, what do I do? There's space in front of me. He's been turning it over. He's been missing short-range jumpers. It takes time. Scotty Barnes, if he was playing in that situation with Damian Lillard, he'd be scoring 30 a game. It would be unbelievable. At the same time, of all the guys who make these immediate decisions, none of them can hold their hand up and be at the rim, grab their offensive rebounds and dunk over 3 guys. He is so unique that you're absolutely right. What does he want to be? It's hard because he can look at the history of the NBA and be like, well, none of these guys are me. I don't know.
Right. And it goes back to one of the things. We will get there in 1 second because, obviously, if Dame was on this team, I don't even want to talk about what we offer for Dame because we all said it was a 2K trade from based on what was reported. If that is at all true, that ain't real. But if you somehow got Pascal Siakam and Scotty Barnes with Dame, you got you have something to build upon, like something real, in my opinion. But didn't happen. So I guess my question, which kind of jumps us ahead, Coach mentioned this actually. We kind of run at times, from a Darko sense, a Golden State-esque, or the other one that runs it, Sacramento-esque offense, which makes sense. Mike Brown coached, a little bit, spent a little bit of time in Golden State. We kind of run that type of offense. Now, hypothetically, this is the first question, is hypothetically, based on the players on the roster, Masai ain't doing no trades, okay, what lineups would you put together? And let's just assume that everyone's healthy, and even if you have a, beyond with an oxygen mask feeding Christian Coloco in between timeouts, what's your 5-man unit that you're going with usually?
I'm going to cede the first answer. Do either of you guys want to answer that one before me?
Well, okay. It was my thought experiment, right? I was thinking like, okay, if he really wants to run this offense, which players are best? Let's remove who's defensive liabilities. Just say what could get us the best offense possible. That when Sampson does his post game, in this case here, he can say, hey, they're above the average of this much for the 10th straight game in a row. So what could that look like? And I'm thinking to myself, okay, if we're gonna play the high post, then Scotty Barnes would be who I have there at that spot instead of Purdy. I would then have 2 guys in this case here, be it OG, I guess, as starters, and say GTJ as the other one. If you want to have that same action you have for two shooters out there, in this case, you have them out there. Of course, you have to have Pascal out there as well, too, I think, if I'm looking at that. And then I would have probably, if I'm really looking at it, the ideal person would probably be Coloca. If I'm looking at all the centers that are available to me, that would be the five I would have out there. And then my bench unit would be to try to replicate that in some ways. I would have, in this case, a second unit where Siakam mans the second unit at times if Scotty's off the floor or vice versa. He's in that role, in this case, doing that. And then I have, in this case, Grady and Otto out there with those two in this case here. And then as far as centers go, at that point, I think the best scenario probably would be Precious if playing as the other center. If I had to have a second center, I might not want a second center, but let's say I do want a second center because there's not much to pick from. So Precious would be probably the best thing because he can hit a three once in a while, and and at least he might be a lob threat at some points. And then my next guy would probably, based on the group I see there, slashing and cutting if he's possible would probably be McDaniels if I'm thinking of, just to get the best 10 guys I can think of. I don't think Pirtle in this case can work in this offense at all. That's why I didn't mention his name. I don't think Boucher really can work in this offense at all. And with all due respect to Malachi Flynn, I don't think he really works in this offense at all. If I'm just picking the guys I think can make this offense hum as close to possible to Golden State's offense and get the highest ceiling possible, those to me are like the 10 guys I would pick. In this case, if I had to go 10, as I said before, I need a second center somewhere because, unless I'm going to play Scotty at center every second, on the backup minutes, which is a possibility, I just go 9 deep and I just cut Precious out of the play altogether because I don't think he really fits either, but I'm running out of players. So that's what I would suggest as my actions in this case, to run that type of offense without anything else. No defense involved. I'm just thinking what can get me the highest offensive potential as possible. That's the group I would say. But we're not playing all those type of guys at this point here.
Coach?
That's my theory. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, part of me wants to have Otto in my five, just because for one, he played in Golden State. He's familiar with the offense and stuff like that. I think he makes really good reads in general when he's on the court. I would have him. I would have Scotty, like Beyond said, kind of in that hub spot, if you want to call it. And then you can have Pascal. I probably would have to put Gary out there as well, just to help space the floor, a little bit of cutting as well. Then I'm probably coming down to Schroeder or OG. I'm probably have to go with OG in the end, just because
you didn't put Schroeder out there either.
Yeah, I probably would have to go with one of those guys if I'm just trying. This is offense. This is the split action stuff where you're just looking for a bucket. You need people who can know how to play it, for one, which is why I have Otto out there, and just the ability to read the court.
Yeah, I have a very similar group. So yeah, from the same foundation, Pascal and Scotty, right? Those are the two stars. But if you actually look at the Wowie numbers, like with and without, there's some really, really interesting patterns. So if you sort of separate everybody else into categories, Jakob Poeltl, as good as he is, the Raptors are significantly worse with him playing alongside Scotty and Pascal than on the bench. And so, the numbers there together, they have a minus 3.8 net rating, all three, whereas Siakam and Barnes without Poeltl is plus 15. So that's like an outrageous 19-point swing. And those are real numbers, both over 100 minutes in both categories. But there's some other really surprising ones. Scotty and Pascal alongside Schroeder is negative. It's about neutral. Whereas with Schroeder on the bench, it's plus 30. That's in just 30 minutes. So that's not really a sample size enough. They don't tend to play Barnes and Siakam without Schroeder, although I'd like to see them try, because maybe, who knows. OG, Gary, both huge positives. So all three of those, Siakam, Barnes, Gary is plus 10, and they're neutral without Gary. Those are real minutes again. And then the OG one, Siakam, Anunoby, OG is plus 12. Without OG is -7. So they need OG. And so if you were to separate all those guys, it's just shooters. Like, it's literally just guys who demand attention. That's, Pirtle, not a shooter, doesn't demand attention. Schroeder, hitting his shots, but doesn't demand defensive attention, doesn't force closeouts. Whereas Anunoby, Trent, they do. So yeah, I think based on that, let Scottie run point guard. I think he's done a good job. And then Siakam, Anunoby, Trent, and Porter. Yeah, another shooter, guy who knows how to play, can play defense. I think that would be an interesting unit. Like size, they'd probably be vulnerable to switching screens. I think the defense could hold up really well, but I would like to see that group at least get a couple minutes, see what happens.
So, Louis, just basically, I mean, let's face it, we're not likely going to make any moves. I mean, I know there's folks on the social media spaces.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, I until I see it in this case here, I'm not believing it, because I've been down this road too many times with this team about deals happening. But with the roster we have right now, are we like? Is it pretty much as simple as this? I mean, it's a bit reductive. I know what I'm about to say, but it's a bit reductive. But could the simplest tweaks could be to help improve this offense? It could be GTJ starts instead of Schroeder. We pray for some good, healthy lungs for Koloko. Like, literally, is that what we're talking about?
I think Schroeder's done a really good job. He's not the ideal point guard for this roster, but they're paying him the mid-level exception. Like, based on what they've asked him to be, I think he's been like 10 out of 10. He's not the point guard of the future.
No,
right? Don't get me wrong.
If we had to have this discussion in August, did any of us think he would be the starting point guard? Or the starting five?
I have to go back, but we were all high on the shooter pickup, a lot higher.
No, I like the shooter pickup, but I think most people have the shooter pickup in this case as playing like his typical role he's played for the last 10 years as a sixth man, getting like close to 30 minutes a night. I don't think, that's
I assumed he'd start.
Okay.
But that was also based on, I didn't think Scottie would become Godzilla. Like, it's crazy how much better Scottie's gotten at everything on the basketball court. I didn't think he'd be ready to play point guard, 30 minutes a night. He might be. So maybe that means Schroeder can be a sixth man, but I do think having that second attacker, like, the reason why the Raptors put the Pistons in the ground so early tonight wasn't Scottie Barnes or Pascal Siakam. It was Dennis Schroeder ran a million. He cut them to death. Like, UCLA cut off Pirtle, back cut off Pirtle, ran some baseline cuts, ran some Chicago stuff. He ran them into the ground. And so, yeah, maybe, as far as the ceiling goes, I get it. Maybe starting Gary would help Scottie more, give him more space than Schroeder. He draws closeouts. But as far as the floor goes, I really like having that second ball handler, a guy who's super sticky on defense, and just knows how to eat minutes, right? He's like that middle reliever who's just going to eat minutes and find success.
I use that example a lot too for different players. Yeah,
yeah.
Minutes, right?
Is there any information? I've only seen it once this year, but maybe I'm wrong, on the lineup. Take Schroeder out and put Gary in. What that lineup is together, like with their net rating or whatever.
Yeah. So Pascal, OG, Scottie, Pirtle, and Gary.
Yeah.
They have played exactly 4 minutes together. So the net rating is meaningless. It's plus 34. It means nothing though.
Meaningless. Yeah,
but that number is really the stat. 4 minutes.
4 minutes. That's the stat. Yeah.
That's unreal.
Yeah. I mean, OG hasn't played all season, pardon me, OG hasn't played it recently until this last game, but I really think Rajakovic's vision was Scottie plus bench. How can we make that work? I think a lot of the way that this rotation is built is with that in mind. I also think this might be a different conversation. I don't think Rajakovic thought Siakam was going to be a Raptor when the season started.
Well,
And so I think a lot of his
Hey.
plans were based on him not being on the team.
it was
He
like
even
the
mentioned
meme that
his
we
name for
always say.
entire summer. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I'm sorry, I wasn't familiar with your game.
Yeah. Go on.
Really? Yeah. We tracked that pretty much throughout the whole season year. I kept on going, like, has he referred to Siakam yet? I've never seen a new coach not a star player yet, or even make mention of him in an interview. Like, hello. I know we were asking, we were so happy. I think Samson asked it the first day. When Samson asked the question about Siakam, if Samson or Grange, someone asked the question, like I said, hallelujah. Someone asked him about
Yeah.
They were Doug Smith.
It Doug Smith. It was Doug.
Yeah, it was.
They were
Yeah,
Doug.
yeah.
I don't know. He's been watching or listening to our speeds. It's like, hey, it's like, he realized.
Yeah.
It's
They've been really professional about it. Like, I don't mean that to say there's any animosity.
Mhm.
I think there could have been, right? If there were different egos on this team, it could have played out a very different way. And it hasn't. I mean, like Siakam's playing, he's enjoying himself, he's a leader. It's been to the utmost professionalism, but this team was not built with him in mind.
Has it ever been?
I think it was for like a month and a half stretch. To end the 21-22 season, right? With when Precious Achua was hitting threes above the break,
Right.
and Fred was hurt a lot. His knees were gone, and so he wasn't really doing nearly as much.
He was in and out of the line. So
Yeah, they were like, let's build this around Siakam, and it were, I thought they played a really meaningful 6-game series against Philadelphia. And that was the time that they gave him.
right.
Yep. And if Barnes was hitting his open shots like he is now, because I remember that last game, and people don't talk about this. There's a lot of missed shots from outside with Siakam spraying it out. But anyways, it is what it is. What I will say then is, now that we've talked about, like, the Golden State-esque offense, what's interesting is that Darko seems to, at some level, value tradition, even though we do not have a traditional roster in terms of the personnel. So, I find that interesting. I am curious, if you were to put together a team, because it seems like you're okay with Siakam being here at some level in the future, if you were a consultant or something like that, if they would be so kind as to hire your services one day. I guess the question is that with Pascal and Barnes, because we talked about the numbers, and part of that is, I say, as Samson would say, advantage creation, as I would say, gravity. It helps. My question is, what are probably the best 3 players that you could put around them to maximize it? Yeah.
Like, are we talking fantasy? Just choose anyone out of a hat, or realistic players the Raptors could acquire?
I won't go fantasy, because you could just say put KD.
Yeah.
So that would be nice. No, don't get me wrong, but yeah, more realistic, something that could actually happen. Like, I'm just gonna toss it out there just because it is in the. Would you go for Zach LaVine? This isn't where I was originally gonna take it, but I'm just curious.
I think Zach LaVine would look really good on these Raptors, and the price is just getting lower and lower. I thought the Raptors might trade for Zach LaVine instead of Pirtle last year. I know that he's not like a popular trade target, but the guy is an unbelievable shooter, self-created and off the catch, a great finisher around the rim, and those are Toronto's weaknesses. I think he fit really well, but I think you don't need Zach LaVine to fix Toronto's problems. Like, there are cheap players. Like, Schroeder looks amazing on this team. Monte Morris would look even better. Like, Monte Morris is wasting away. There's point guards who don't turn the ball over, who can get in the lane, who hit threes, who don't do a whole lot. Like, Tyus Jones is probably not, super available right now, but he'd look phenomenal on Toronto. I'm just naming.
Mind, right? Just curious.
Yeah,
mind, right?
that's right. So I think
LaVine
LaVine would look great, but a lot of guys would look great because Toronto has tons of talent. There's a lot of talent on this team, and great talent means you don't need, greatness doesn't require greatness to support it. Greatness just requires a foundation. And I think they need to do something to build that foundation.
Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to Mouse because he's been wanting Tyus Jones on this team forever.
True.
Although I've said for the longest time that the second that he went to the Wizards, he ain't available no more.
Yeah.
But how you can build this out a bit, and Lewis kind of touched on it a bit. What do we have access of?
Yeah.
Wings.
Chris Boucher.
Yes. What do we subtract to bring in something that we need? It's a guard, probably guard forward, point guard, two guard, something like that, combo guard. So that's how you're, like you said, you're able to do that. We have had discussions about you don't have to make this blockbuster move to really improve this team. It could be a small move, it could be a couple of small moves, give the roster more balance, let's just say. Give it maybe another shooter, another shot creator. Doesn't have to be Zach LaVine per se, but just to make this roster more balanced and less redundant moving forward.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I mean, look, I didn't mean that as a slight against Boucher. He's a really good player.
Yeah.
A lot of teams could use him. You know who does not need him a super big amount is the Raptors.
Lewis, if you were a DJ, I'm in the club right now. You're playing all my jams right now. You're playing all right now, man. The mix is hot right now. That's all I gotta say. Thank you. I'm not going crazy. Thank you.
Yeah, during the summer, one of the things that I was hoping for is I was like, if we don't get Dame, if Dame somehow goes to Miami, I was like, can we somehow do a GTJ Boucher for Hero? Because I'm like, that would. Yeah, I don't think that they're not going to do that now.
I think to Lewis's point, and we discussed in the last episode as well too, is like if you just instill and put like a combo guard, a dynamic guard off the bench, that alone would lift lift this offense to a different level. It just helps everybody out. It helps Scotty out. All of a sudden now you got dump off passes probably for Siakam and Scotty. All these type of things. Cleaner shots for threes for these guys. Take a poor fella like Grady right now. That unless it's a Pascal post up, he gets no time to shoot anything half the time. If you even had a guy who could do that and just penetrate. I mean, we've mentioned in this case here, like someone like Sexton. There's other guys you can see right now are just in uncomfortable positions right now, where it's like, that guard in Toronto in this case here. We were trying to get our fellow Canadian in this case here before he got picked, he got re-signed. NAW. I mean, even there's cheap alternatives that would just lift this team up and give it a different look. We don't need one more power forward that really is not much of a shooter and just kind of pounds the glass. Like, we don't need any more dudes like that.
And the thing about a lot of these guys, actually, so let me start with Grady. The reason why Grady's looked good despite missing shots for some games is because he sprints through cuts. If he's running a pin down, he is running a pin down. If he's getting a pass, he is catching with his feet set, in shooting position. And if he's driving, he is zooming into the lane. Now, recently that's meant turnovers because he's going 5 kilometers an hour faster than his brain is going. Yep. That's fine. He's a rookie. That doesn't bother me at all. But if the Raptors, they have been jogging through cuts for 5 straight years, part of that is they have nobody who can just sprint through a cut and catch it and do anything with it. Like if Anunoby, great player, unbelievable shooter, if he sprinted full speed around a cut and caught the ball, he has a 0% chance of hitting the shot, right? They have no one who is a movement shooter who is actually able to shift the defense by just cutting. And so Grady's looked phenomenal by doing that. And a lot of these guys we're describing, Tyus Jones, he can move 1,000,000 miles an hour, catch and do something. And so, so too can Zach LaVine. But a lot of the things Toronto needs is not just shooting, right? Like Matt Thomas, for example, he was a great shooter. He wouldn't help this team. It's a lot of skills in combination, but those skills aren't that hard to find in the NBA.
Especially if you're looking for guards in this case here. If it was a big, I would be more concerned. But for guards, I think the thing that what you're describing there is something that's kind of just annoyed me a little bit with the Raptors philosophy sometimes, because I think this goes back to making life hard for themselves. And I don't know what your thoughts about this is, but I find I sometimes question if they know their personnel. And what I mean by that is Grady right now is proven right now, and Coach and I have discussed this as well, Kenya. At this moment here, I can safely say that his weakest spot right now is being a spot up 3-point shooter. That's not Grady's thing. To your point, I think Grady shoots better off the move. And every time they have a pin down, they don't do them too many times, but every few times they give him a pin down, it's butter in the net. And I sit here going, why can't we just run pin downs for this kid? A couple staggered screens and just let him run off of that. Why do we have to sit him in the corner? You know, especially for young players are used to, especially if you have high-end young players are used to having the ball in their hands in college. And all of a sudden now I'm just spotting in the corner. That's why vets are usually very good at sitting in the corner and just come off the bench. Because a guy Otto has known how to do that for years and pick whichever other guy you see on the bench doing that, sitting in the corner just shooting threes. Danny Green for like a decade has been doing that. Because those guys know how to prepare themselves. I get like 4 shots a game. I better be ready to hit those 4 shots. Guy's been all-American in this case is not sitting around saying like, boy, I'm going to sit here for like 20 minutes here and my hands are getting heavy. And I get 2 shots in the corner. You can't expect that for guys like that. You know, and I just think like I find that that's the part that just frustrates me a little bit with this offense where it's like, even poor Pirtle, who I've been tough on. But to be fair to Pirtle in this case is a great screen setter. We don't use the setting screens. Like, we don't do it. We screen for one person, Schroeder. That's about it. We don't screen for Pascal. We don't screen for Grady. We don't screen for anybody.
In the Milwaukee game, I saw it twice. Dame was guarding Grady, and they only ran this twice that I noticed anyway. Grady came off, stagger screen, chased, Dame was running, missed it. The next time at the foul line, swish, he made it. Yeah. I'm thinking to myself, you don't have Giannis tonight. Run the hell out of Dame on defense. Make him work to wear him down. And I just didn't see that enough. I think they could have had Grady in a few more actions, even if it's not so much to create shots for him, but to generate that gravity that he probably would create. Because Dame running around the court is going to make him tired. He's not 25 anymore. He's almost 35. So you're going to wear down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was annoyed. Go ahead, Bill Lewis.
No, I was going to say that's quite perceptive. It's hard to stand still and then hit a shot. I mean, like it seems like the easiest thing if you've never hooped. It's quite difficult.
That's one of the things where it's like, if you hoop, in this case here, it's like that you got to be in a certain mental state and a certain type of mindset with that ability to do so. That's why vets are usually the guys that are the best type of guys, like PJ Tuckers of the world. It might get 2 shots a game.
And that's one thing I was really impressed with Scotty Barnes tonight against Detroit, especially, is the shot preparation tonight was immaculate. Like last year and rookie season especially, he shot threes, but it was very frequently he'd catch, he'd think about it, then he'd shoot. And tonight it was immediate. Like he was in the shot before he even caught the ball. And his jumper looks fine. He has no like broken jumper. I mean, Siakam's jumper looks very beautiful from 15 feet, but he's got that DeMar DeRozan thing where he needs a lot of the motion into the shot. Doesn't seem to extend out behind the 3-point line super well. Whereas Scotty Barnes, none of that. It's a very clean jumper. And tonight especially, I was really impressed with shot preparation. And that's hard, right? That takes veteran understanding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the one thing that's very interesting about Scotty is that as a catch and shoot, I think I have the numbers here again. This is not including tonight's game, but from a catch and shoot, it looks like he is. Sorry, I have to just zoom in a bit because it's small. I believe it's 42%. That's pretty good from 3. The challenge now is that the pull up, the harder shot, that now, granted. 1/4 of the time he's taking those as catch and shoots, and that's what you want. But the pull-up is the struggle still with about 31, I'll just round it up, %. And that's not bad based on where he was last year. I don't even want to look at the numbers for last year, but I think that's definitely an improvement. So it's interesting because I do think that there are ways that you can maximize it. And by the way, I agree. I bring up Zach LaVine just because, he's talked about, but I don't think you have to make some crazy move. I think that we have the pieces here in general to get to where we need to go without completely revamping. Although, hindsight being 2020, just going to say, I was a fan of Turner. last deadline. That's all. I'll leave it at that.
Don't tease me.
Well, so uh, before I go to anything else, and we're actually getting to the close of this, I guess my last question is, what do you, I guess, like, what do you hope for between now and, I guess, game 30, we'll say? Because typically in the NBA, what you look like, and we're even seeing this game by game, but what you look like before game 20 and after game 20 looks a little bit different. And especially as you prepare for January, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like January typically is the most predictive for who's going to make the playoffs or whatever. And we're not in a bad position, actually. I would actually argue that based on who we just faced for the past couple weeks, and just, yes, we could probably have, it's 2 more wins at least, but we're not in a bad place. So, what do you hope to see in terms of just a difference in philosophy or offense? Because I do think that Darko is open to change and open to compromise, not just with Pascal, but just in the roster in general. Because, as Beyond says, the only thing that these guys have to add to their resume as a coach is the W.
I'm going to go first because I know someone's going to take mine.
Mhm.
I want 2 things. I want roster clarity, whether that's extensions or trades.
Exactly.
I like Siakam and Anunoby and Trent to a lesser extent. Trent's a valuable player, but Siakam and Anunoby are, they mean more to the team. The team needs to trade them or sign them. They cannot enter free agency with both as unrestricted free agents. To lose both would be pack it up, move the team to Seattle. Like that, disastrous. It would just be mismanagement of the highest Babcockian order. And the other thing I want is just for Scotty Barnes' 3-point percentage to maintain. Just let the guys' jumper still stick around. I'm not asking for miracles. I don't want it to be 50%. Like, just if this is what he is as a shooter, then the season's a win.
Yeah, man. Hey, man. I'm there with your chapter and verse, man. I'm there with your chapter and verse.
I knew you'd take it.
Yes.
That's why I had to go first.
The Gospel of Lewis.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm down with that, man. Oh, man. I think the other thing I want to see is, honestly, I want to see growth from 2 players I want to see growth from. And one is Grady, we've discussed already. And I am hoping, I don't know what it is. I said before, you mentioned this case, a CPAP machine, whatever it is. I really want to see Koloko because that's the guy I really was most excited to see as the season started. As much as the Scotty stuff was what we all knew about, you knew in this case the guy I really wanted to see what Darko had in Memphis with Triple J. I was begging to see what that would look like with Koloko. And man, oh man, did I think Koloko, I knew Koloko would be a key part of this team. I didn't realize it would be this much of an issue with him not being on this team. Because I think a lot of this stuff starts to make a lot more sense if he's out there able to play 20, 25 minutes. Because right now, he can't get back fast enough in my mind. He can't get back fast enough. So that is something I hope to see sometime before Jolly Saint Nick comes down chimney. I'm hoping to see that in this case here.
Yeah, kind of like what Lewis said, roster clarity for sure. But I'm going to say in this regards, and I mentioned to Beyond and Kenyon earlier, OG, this team has not been very good when he's not in the lineup. When he's in the lineup, they've been pretty good. I'm very concerned about what they do with him if he is still on this team past the deadline, because it's going to be a massive bidding war if he continues to have the impact on this team that he's currently having, offensively in terms of spacing the floor, defensively of guarding Jokic one night, Donovan Mitchell the next night. The money between Jeremy Grant and Jade McDaniels, OG's price is going up and up and up. Like, I think this could reach 38 to 40 million a year, the way that it's going right now. So I certainly would like to see some kind of roster clarity from that front on him, whether they somehow, I know he can't sign the extension, I don't think, because it's really low ball. Like, he's going to get more than that.
Well, he just won't, because he would lose a ton of money.
Yeah, so I'm just like, man, if this bidding war for him goes up and up and up, like if you have to trade him, I understand it in the long run. Because, like you said, it's it's just gonna kill this team if you lose him and Siakam at the trade deadline, or sorry, at the end of the season for nothing. And that relationship with Pascal right now, I don't think it's what it was 3 years ago. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. For myself, roster clarity is obviously the biggest thing. Now, personally, I feel a particular type of way because as much as I think OG is super optimized in this role, I don't know if he's happy in this role. And I think if you trade, my philosophy has always been if you trade Siakam, let's you know what? Let's actually make a mock trade, the Ivy trade. Say you get Ivy from Detroit. I don't think that that's going to help OG Anunoby to have more of the playmaking and whatever responsibilities. In fact, his usage is down this year ever so slightly, or it was before the finger, whatever the heck happened to his finger. So he's basically in the same role that he had last year. He's really good at this role. This is like the perfect role for him. I don't need him to be Mikhail, the guy in
Bridges.
Yeah, sorry, I mix up Miles and I didn't want to say the wrong one.
Yeah.
So, but yes, the one in Brooklyn. So I don't need him to be that, and I don't know if he can be that. I'll be honest. Some people are still holding out hope. With my athletic background, which I will not describe on the show, and just in general, I am interested in biomechanics and stuff like that. Did study a little bit of it. I would say that there's a lower chance that he will be able to get there in a way that he needs to get there, in a way that people believe that he can. So I would have a serious conversation. I think it can work with all three, by the way. I do, but it really comes down to, is OG going to be happy with X role? Because at some point, even if you just move forward with Pascal being gone, he's eventually not going to have that role anyways, and then you're just kind of wasting your time. So that, I think, is the most important thing. There is a way to make it work, even money wise. I think Blake described that you could make it work. You might have to make some trim around the edges with instead of a full mid level, you don't use the full mid level, you have other tools at your disposal. But I think that you have to have conversations, and I do see value in having someone who wants to be here, because we've never really had that be here. I think it shows a lot to agents. I think it shows who really run the league, to be honest. And I think it shows a lot to players as well. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
I think there's a third part to it. There's a certain like franchise equity, right? We've never had a Raptor end his career as a Raptor.
No.
This guy didn't end his career as a Raptor. Lowry has not ended, obviously, didn't end his career as a Raptor. I think of all the great Raptors. DeRozan, obviously not. Like, there's something to that in this case here. And I think sometimes there's too much of a transactional mindset with this franchise, right? I mean, we were joking the other day, Clay with one leg and they were still signing Clay up. Right? Right? And all this talk with Clay right now. Does anyone ever think the Warriors are going to trade Klay Thompson? No.
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
That's right.
Yeah, and I think with the Raptors, it goes too far. The pendulum goes. I'm not saying you got to give them the Kobe sweetheart deal or not like that in those circumstances, if that's the case. But there's too much to swing the other way, where it's like, that's got to mean something, right? You can't have the fan base have all these guys root for these guys for years, and then when it just suits you, just snap a finger and off you go. Like, it's got to be some tangibleness to that too, right? Like, I mean, there's a and I think that at some point you just can't do that all the time and think that it doesn't start eroding your equity amongst the other players, agents, your reputation around the league. Those things start mattering after time.
Let me put it this way: you can trade DeMar DeRozan for Kawhi Leonard. You can't trade him for Zach LaVine.
Bingo. Ironically,
Yeah, I mean, We're not ready to do that show yet, but I will.
You literally can't. They're teammates.
Yeah. I was saying, ironically.
Yeah,
example.
ironically.
Yeah.
But also metaphorically.
Yes.
But,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, I'll just say this: you look at the advanced metrics, and I know people try to sell, or however you feel about Pascal Siakam, him and Zach LaVine are very different players on very many different levels. I just will leave it at that. We do not have the time to go through that, but very different. Even Zach LaVine pre-injury, different dude. So with that being said, it's been Basketball Rewind. Louis, is there anything? Well, you actually talked about it a little bit. You're coming up with a piece. So this will probably come out after the piece because it's Tuesday. You said?
Is it Tuesday?
Tuesday morning. Yeah, published
No.
Tuesday morning.
The piece will be down below the description for starters, because this will probably come out on Wednesday. If not, it might come out on Tuesday, but we will see how I feel about it. But Louis, is there anything other than that that you want to plug for yourself?
No, that's all. That's all. So yeah, you can find that on Raptors Republic. The editor there, tons of cool work beyond just my own. Yeah, great spot for Raptor stuff. No, and I just wanted to thank you guys. It's been super fun. Great way to sort of detox after the game. So really appreciate you guys having me on. It's just a blast.
Oh, thanks,
Absolutely.
man. We appreciate you coming on too, man.
Yes. We've had Trey, we've had Samson. Hopefully, they're willing to come back as well. I think has Trey been on
Amazing.
twice?
Trey's been on twice. We had the
He
OG
has been on twice, actually. Yeah, once with me and then once with, yeah. So honestly, hopefully you come back as well.
Would love to.
And with that being said, it's been fun. Coach or Beyond, do you guys have anything that you guys want to plug? I know you guys are going to be back anyways.
I'll be back here next week, man. Don't worry about it. That's what I'm plugging.
Same bat time, same bat channel, man.
Exactly.
Be back.
Absolutely. So yeah, this has been Basketball Rewind. Like, comment, subscribe for more of this type of information and more of this type of stuff. Obviously today we're not talking about the general NBA, but we will be talking about that the next time. Of course, I will be checking in with my guy Cason Wallace. And with that being said, it's been fun. So peace.